God is opening heaven over your life. Don't miss these signs. There are moments in life when something shifts quietly, almost imperceptibly. Yet, everything begins to feel different. You may not be able to explain it, but you sense it. Your prayers feel closer. Your heart feels more awake. Situations that once overwhelmed you no longer have the same grip. It's not that life has suddenly become easy, it's that God feels near in a way that is unmistakable. The Bible speaks of moments like this as an open heaven, not a dramatic spectacle reserved for a few, but a spiritual reality that unfolds when God draws near, when access deepens, and when His presence becomes more tangible in everyday life. An open heaven is not about perfection or spiritual performance. It is about alignment, about God responding to a heart that is being positioned for deeper relationship. Many believers assume heaven opens only after everything is fixed, after prayers are answered, battles are won, or faith feels strong. But Scripture shows us something far more personal and profound. Heaven often opens in the middle of ordinary life, in seasons of surrender, in moments of obedience no one else sees, in hearts that are hungry, not just for blessings but for God Himself. If you've sensed a stirring lately, an unusual clarity, a deeper conviction, a peace that doesn't make sense, or a pull toward prayer, you may not be imagining it. God does not open heaven randomly. He does it intentionally. And when He does, it changes how you hear Him, how you walk, and how you respond to life. This doesn't mean challenges disappear. In fact, Scripture often shows that open heaven and testing can exist at the same time. But when heaven opens, fear loses its authority. Confusion gives way to discernment. Striving is replaced by trust. You begin to recognize God's hand, not just in miracles, but in timing, protection, and direction. This message is not meant to inflate expectations or create spiritual hype. It is meant to help you discern what God may already be doing, because when heaven opens over your life, it doesn't always announce itself loudly, but it always leaves evidence. So take a breath. Quiet your heart for a moment. If God is drawing closer, it's not overwhelm you. It's to invite you. And learning to recognize the signs of an open heaven can help you walk forward with humility, confidence, and awe, fully aware that God is at work in ways far greater than you may realize. Number 1, your spiritual sensitivity has increased. One of the clearest signs that God is opening heaven over your life is a noticeable shift in your spiritual sensitivity. Things you once overlooked now stir your heart. You become more aware of God's presence, more responsive to conviction, and more discerning about what aligns or doesn't align with His Spirit. This isn't emotional hype. It's spiritual awareness being sharpened. You may find that your conscience is more tender, not in a way that produces fear or condemnation, but in a way that draws you toward truth. Conversations affect you differently. Certain habits lose their appeal. You sense when something is off, even if you can't explain why. This heightened sensitivity is not weakness. It is evidence that God is drawing you closer to His heart. When heaven opens in Scripture, awareness increases. People see more clearly, hear more distinctly, and respond more quickly to God. That same pattern still exists. God doesn't overwhelm you with information. He tunes your heart. You begin to notice His nudges, His warnings, His invitations, and you realize that God has been speaking all along. You're just hearing Him more clearly now. This sensitivity also brings discernment. You're less easily swayed by noise, pressure, or false urgency. You recognize the difference between God's peace and emotional impulse, between conviction and accusation, between God's timing and human impatience. That clarity is not self-generated. It is the result of increased spiritual access. If you've felt more aware of God lately, more attentive in prayer, more alert in your spirit, more responsive to truth, that is not coincidence. Heaven does not open without effect. When God draws near, your inner life becomes more awake, and that awakening is one of the first signs that heaven is opening over you. Number 2, prayer feels more natural and more effective. Another powerful sign that heaven is opening over your life is the way prayer begins to change. What once felt forced now feels natural. What once required effort now flows with sincerity. You may not be praying longer prayers, but you are praying more honest ones, and there is a sense that your words are not just being spoken but received. When heaven opens, prayer shifts from obligation to connection. You stop performing and start communing. You feel less pressure to say the right things and more freedom to speak from the heart. Prayer becomes less about convincing God and more about aligning with Him. And in that alignment, confidence grows. You may notice that answers come with clarity rather than drama. Sometimes the answer is peace. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's direction you didn't expect. But prayer begins to produce fruit, not always immediately, but consistently. You trust that God hears you even when the outcome isn't instant. Scripture shows us that when heaven opens, prayer becomes effective because access has been granted, not because the person praying is perfect, but because God has drawn near. That nearness removes barriers. It quiets doubt. It strengthens faith. If prayer has felt easier lately, not because life is easy, but because God feels closer, that is a sign. If you found yourself drawn to prayer rather than pushing yourself into it, pay attention. Heaven opening over your life doesn't always change your circumstances first. Often it changes your communication with God. And when prayer becomes more natural, it's because heaven is no longer distant. It's because God has invited you closer. And prayer becomes the place where that open access is experienced most clearly. Number 3, you experience unusual peace in uncertain circumstances. One of the most undeniable signs that God is opening heaven over your life is the presence of peace that doesn't make sense given what you're facing. Circumstances may still be unresolved. Questions may still remain unanswered. Yet inside there is a calm that wasn't there before, not because the situation is safe, but because your soul feels covered. This peace is not emotional numbness. It doesn't deny reality or ignore pain. It simply refuses to let fear dominate. When heaven opens, God often releases peace as a guard over your heart and mind. That peace steadies you when logic says you should be anxious. It anchors you when outcomes are uncertain, and it allows you to remain present instead of consumed by what if. You may notice that situations which once triggered panic now meet resistance from peace. Your thoughts don't spiral the way they used to. You're still concerned, but not controlled. Still thoughtful, but not overwhelmed. This shift is not self-produced. It is spiritual. Scripture shows us that peace often accompanies God's nearness. When heaven opens, God doesn't always change circumstances immediately, but He changes what rules your inner life. And peace becomes evidence that God is actively guarding you. If you've been wondering why you're calmer in a season that should feel heavier, don't dismiss it. That peace is not accidental. It is not naive. It is a sign that heaven is closer than your fear, and that God is holding you steady while He works behind the scenes. Number 4, divine alignment begins replacing struggle. Another sign of an open heaven is that life begins to align in ways you could never force. Doors open without manipulation. Timing falls into place without striving. Conversations happen at the right moment. People appear when needed, and suddenly what once required exhausting effort begins to move with grace. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy. It means resistance no longer defines your journey. Instead of pushing endlessly against closed doors, you begin to sense when God is making a way. You recognize when to move and when to wait. And that discernment protects you from unnecessary struggle. When heaven opens, God orchestrates alignment. He goes before you. He prepares the way. and he does so without drawing attention to himself. You may not even realize how many things he has already arranged until you look back and see how smoothly events unfolded compared to past seasons. Scripture tells us that God makes paths straight, not by removing every obstacle, but by guiding you around what would have delayed or damaged you. That guidance becomes clearer under an open heaven. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop second-guessing every decision. You begin to walk with confidence, not because you control the future, but because you trust the one who does. If you've noticed that things are falling into place without the usual stress, pay attention. That alignment is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is God working ahead of you, opening doors you didn't knock on, and removing barriers you never saw. Divine alignment is one of the quiet miracles of an open heaven. It doesn't shout, but it carries you forward with purpose and peace. Number 5, you receive clear direction and confirmation. When heaven opens over your life, confusion begins to lose its grip. Not because every detail is suddenly revealed, but because direction becomes clearer. You start recognizing God's leading with greater confidence. Decisions that once felt foggy now carry a sense of peace. You're not guessing as much, you're discerning. This clarity doesn't always come through dramatic signs. More often it comes through confirmation. God speaks the same truth to you from different directions, through scripture, prayer, wise counsel, circumstances aligning, and an inner assurance that refuses to fade. When heaven is open, God confirms his will repeatedly, not to confuse you, but to steady you. You may notice that God's guidance feels consistent rather than scattered. His direction doesn't contradict his character. It doesn't pressure you into panic. It doesn't create chaos in your spirit. Instead, it brings alignment. Even when the path ahead requires courage, there is a quiet confidence that you're being led. Scripture shows us that God is not the author of confusion. When heaven opens, clarity replaces inner turmoil. You may still wrestle with obedience, but you no longer wrestle with knowing what God is asking. His voice becomes familiar. His leading becomes recognizable. If you've been receiving repeated confirmation about the same step, the same truth, the same direction, don't ignore it. God is not trying to overwhelm you. He is establishing confidence. He knows that clarity builds courage. Clear direction is a gift of an open heaven. It doesn't remove responsibility, but it removes doubt. And when God confirms his will, it's because he's already gone ahead of you. Number 6, opposition increases, but fear loses its power. One of the most misunderstood signs of an open heaven is opposition. Many assume resistance means something is wrong, but Scripture often shows the opposite. When heaven opens, darkness resists, but fear no longer rules. You may notice that challenges arise unexpectedly. Resistance increases, criticism appears, pressure builds. Yet strangely, fear doesn't have the same authority it once did. You feel aware of opposition, but not controlled by it. Concerned, but not shaken. That shift is significant. When heaven opens, spiritual authority increases. And where authority grows, resistance often follows. But under an open heaven, God does not remove opposition. He removes fear's power. You become steadier in the face of difficulty. You don't retreat as quickly. You don't panic as deeply. You don't feel the need to defend yourself constantly. Scripture shows us that God often confirms his work through opposition. Not because he causes it, but because it reveals that something meaningful is happening. The difference under an open heaven is that opposition no longer intimidates you. You trust God's protection more than you fear resistance. If you've been facing challenges lately, but feel unusually calm, courageous, or anchored, that is not denial. It is divine confidence. Heaven's presence doesn't always silence storms, but it teaches you how to stand within them. Opposition without fear is a powerful indicator that heaven is open over your life. It means God has strengthened you internally while working externally. And that strength is not accidental. It is intentional preparation. Number 7, your desire for God deepens beyond blessings. One of the most sacred signs that heaven is opening over your life is a shift in what you want most. You still believe God for provision, direction, and breakthrough, but something deeper has taken root. Your greatest hunger is no longer for what God can give you. It is for God Himself. You find yourself drawn to His presence, even when there is nothing urgent to ask for. Worship becomes less about results and more about reverence. Obedience flows more naturally, not because it is easy, but because it feels right. You're no longer motivated by fear of missing out or anxiety about outcomes. You are motivated by closeness. This desire is not manufactured. It cannot be forced. It is the result of increased access. When heaven opens, intimacy deepens. God allows you to taste His presence in a way that satisfies deeper than answered prayers ever could. And once you experience that closeness, your priorities shift. Scripture shows us that heaven opens over those who seek God's face, not just His hand. When your heart begins to long for God beyond blessings, it is evidence that He has already drawn near. You are responding to an invitation, not creating a moment. This hunger brings humility. You stop chasing spiritual experiences and start treasuring daily communion. You stop measuring faith by outcomes and start measuring it by alignment. And in that place, obedience is no longer burdensome. It becomes relational. If you've noticed that your love for God feels more personal, more sincere, more anchored than before, don't overlook it. That desire is not random. It is the fruit of an open heaven. God is not just working around you. He is drawing you into deeper fellowship with Him. And when desire shifts from blessing to presence, heaven doesn't just open over your life, it rests upon it. Conclusion. When heaven opens, your life is never the same. When God opens heaven over your life, it doesn't always announce itself with spectacle. More often, it reveals itself through change. Quiet, steady, unmistakable change. Your awareness deepens. Your prayers strengthen. Peace guards your heart. Alignment replaces striving. Direction becomes clearer. Fear loosens its grip. And your desire for God grows beyond anything this world can offer. An open heaven is not a reward for perfection. It is an invitation into greater access. God opens heaven over hearts that are being aligned, refined, and drawn closer to Him. And once that access is granted, nothing stays the same. Not the way you pray, not the way you walk, not the way you see God at work in your life. If you recognize these signs, don't rush past them. Don't try to recreate them. Simply remain attentive. Open heaven is sustained by humility, obedience, and intimacy, not by striving or performance. God opens heaven to draw you closer, not to elevate you above others. And if you don't recognize all these signs yet, don't be discouraged. God opens heaven in His timing, for His purposes, and according to His wisdom. What matters most is that your heart remains open to Him. Take a moment today to thank God for His nearness. Ask Him to help you steward what He is doing. And trust that the God who opens heaven also knows how to lead you wisely beneath it. If this message stirred your heart, share it with someone who may be sensing God's closeness right now. Leave a comment, subscribe for more faith-filled messages, and stay connected. Because when heaven opens over your life, it's not just a moment, it's the beginning of a deeper walk with God.